Thank you for joining us for another episode of the UNspecial Podcast. We are a space for parents to come be heard, supported, equipped, and inspired. We're not here to give you the latest therapies, behavior modifications. We are simply here for you. We believe in community, and our hope, our goal, is for all parents to be in community with one another.
Well, and LMNT, saltwater, stay salty.
And this just generic.
They dropped us, so
Yeah.
I don't need to do the intro. It's already recorded. All right, today on the show, we have a fantastic career educator, and he's going to give us a lot of insight on the administration side of special education. We're going to hear his background and just his amazing route through the educational world. He is a father of eight, all under 12, and loves God, loves his wife, loves his family. And thank you for being here, Ethan.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So tell me about yourself.
Yeah, there you go. Like you said, I'm married 14 years to a lovely woman that we met randomly just at a baseball game. And
How'd you pull that off?
yeah, so
Get her a hot dog?
actually we did get her dinner. So my sister was working for the Angels up in Anaheim, and a buddy of mine and I were going up there just for the holiday or for the 4th of July weekend. And I said, hey, can you sneak us into the game? And she said, sure, just get me some food because I'm tired of eating hot dogs and stadium food. And so we're on our way to the game, and last minute she says, hey, can you get some food for a friend of mine? I said, yeah, no problem. So we head to the game, we head on in, we give her the food, and that other meal was for the woman that ended up being my wife. So married a year later, actually to the day. So, and you obviously share, but we got 8 awesome kids, 7 boys and 1 very, very tough little girl. But she does all right, holds her own with all those boys. So
I feel sorry for her future husband.
that's right. Yeah. He's got a lot of gentlemen to impress. So,
Yeah.
but grew up in Southern California in Orange County, basically, lived there until I went off to college, ended up going to Point Loma Nazarene University, go Sea Lions.
Alma mater.
That's right. And, got a general ed credential and a special education credential, and started kind of what has been a 17-year career in public education.
Wow. So you got after it right out of college.
Yep. That's right. My mom was a teacher, so we grew up around educators. She was my kindergarten teacher and my 6th grade history teacher. And so me and my 2 siblings, we were, constantly at school. We were there before helping set up bulletin boards. And back in the day when you'd have those, chalkboard erasers, we'd be the ones outside banging those out and, cleaning up the room. And so we were just always around educators and teachers, and, saw a godly woman who just cared about kids and, responded to that calling by being an educator herself. And so even though my siblings and I all swore like, hey, we're not going to be educators, I became a special ed teacher. My sister's a middle school math teacher. My brother was a middle school history teacher. So
Okay.
it was just in the blood.
It's there. What was your career path? So you started as a special ed teacher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I knew just I had a passion for helping young kids. I just love their energy. I love their honesty, and supporting parents in that space. And so I got a multiple subject credential thinking like I was going to teach maybe in middle school. And a gentleman at the time that I was kind of talking with that worked for San Diego Unified in HR said, hey, I'd really encourage you to get a special ed credential as well, right? We're always looking for special ed teachers. And so got that credential and just kind of randomly reconnected with him. It wasn't really an interview, just met with him and said, hey, I've got my credentials. Do you have any advice? And he asked me 2 or 3 questions.
What a job.
Exactly. And ironically, at the end of that, he said, well, when can you start? And I said, are you serious? And so kind of got that job just through some recommendations of people to just expand my horizons when it comes to my credential. And so I worked as a ed specialist in a K-12, or excuse me, a K-8 charter school. It was a small school for a public school, but pretty large for a charter school. And so I was actually a employee of San Diego Unified that kind of got contracted out to work at this charter school. And so did that for 7 years. That charter school grew. It opened up additional sites. And so at that point, the principal asked if I would be willing to sort of step into a role as like a director of special education. So I sort of oversaw the special education program at these multiple sites. Kind of a long story. We moved up to North County, just kind of where we were in terms of looking for affordability and maybe more of like a home life that was more geared toward young families, and took a job kind of doing the same thing. I was at a small charter school overseeing special education And then from there, had a chance to connect back with the old principal that I had worked with at that first school, and kind of got a job on her team supporting instruction in high school mathematics. So I kind of a big shift, and
Special ed to math.
That's it. So went around to a bunch of different high schools, and from there got connected with a school where I applied and became the vice principal. That grew into a principalship role. And then now took an assistant principal position to be just kind of closer to family and be working a lot closer to home.
Gotcha. What's the end goal?
It's funny. Someone was asking me about that the other day because, I've been a principal and now I'm back to being an assistant principal. And, they sort of said, was that difficult? And I said, to some degree it was. It was sort of a demotion, if you will, in my professional career, but it really was a promotion in my personal life. I know as a principal, I just did not have good work-life balance. And I've always said that I hope that, when I look back on my life, I'm a husband and a father first and an administrator second. And I never want those priorities kind of out of whack. And so I'm just really enjoying kind of the time I'm in, the space I'm in. You have a little more time off in the summer as an assistant principal. There's one person up the ladder you can always kick things to that you can't when you're the principal. So I really am not looking for the quote unquote next sensible career move. I'm not trying to be a principal somewhere. I just want to be part of a team that I think has a really clear vision for what we're trying to do on a campus that I've bought into, right? I think sometimes people say, I want to be an administrator. Well, my response to that is like, well, why? Right? It's sort of like, I just want to be in management. Well, what is it you care about? What is it you're trying to build? What is it that, why should people want to be managed by you? Right. Yeah. And so what I would say is, if those opportunities present themselves, certainly, my wife and I will pray a lot about them and, just want to make sure, again, like I said, we've got that good balance, but I'm just kind of happy where I'm at, and we'll see like where the Lord takes me.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you, like a lot of our parents out there, a lot of our listeners, obviously they are dealing with a lot with 24/7 care for their kid. I mean, you have 8 kids and a wife, and you're still married, being an administrator. How do you balance it all?
Yeah. So one of the things I asked my assistant principals to do when I was a principal at my last site was, toward the end of the year, I said, what I want you to do is sort of make a pie chart of how would you hope to spend your day as an administrator, right? If you could plan the perfect day as an administrator. And then I want you to make a second pie chart. How do you actually spend your day? And unfortunately, too frequently, those two things don't line up, right? There are a lot of things that kind of get put on our plate for a variety of reasons. A lot of those are good reasons, but those can start to creep into the things that you're really passionate, the things you care about. And I think I remember it might have been Steve Jobs or someone was kind of talking about, unless the things you're saying to are things that you're like, absolutely 100%, we are doing this. Even if they're good things, you have to be able to say no to those things. And so I think if your priorities and if your values and your priorities, if you're clear on those, if you're clear on what that pie chart is, there are going to be some things that you have to say no to, right? As a principal, I know I felt that pull, right? The band wants you at their performance, the theater wants you at their performance, right? And I certainly want to be at all those things. And when we can make that a family thing, we absolutely did it. We brought the kids, Rand and I would go for a date night. But I had to kind of hold true to like, what is that pie chart that is not only me as an administrator, but me also as a husband and a father, and be able to say no to things and just be okay with that.
Yeah. Saying no.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a challenge for any parent.
Sure.
Especially our heart goes for our kids. But at the end of the day, saying no is typically a lot of the times the more powerful thing to do.
Well, and I think it's hard to say no when you don't have a clear vision of what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
Right. Because that emotional pull of people wanting your time, people wanting, you to be at those events, right? Like that's real. Right. And I wanted to be there for all of those things to support the kids, to definitely signal to them that, man, I'm here to support you. I appreciate what you're doing and I'm excited about it. And so I think that we can get pulled in so many different directions, and it's true in parenting too, right? At the end of the day, my wife and I have had this conversation a lot that our goal is to raise godly 35-year-old men, right? It's not necessarily to raise T-ball all-stars or, honor roll students. And even though those things might contribute to that, our goal is at the end of the day, men that lead their family well, that love their wives, that serve their communities, right? A daughter that loves her husband and cares for her family. And when you do that, and when you have clarity around that, how you spend your time, how you spend your finances, all of that starts to hopefully come into alignment with that. And I think that's true, in your career, in your relationships, right? Being just really clear on like, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? because lots of great things are going to just kind of sneak onto your plate, right? And so you can't say no to things unless you know what you're trying to say yes to.
Yeah, clarity. Clarity is a powerful thing. I mean, let's be honest though. You're bound to have at least one professional athlete.
Man, just as long as one takes care of us. That's it. That's what we need.
That's all you need. So you've been teaching for 17 years in education. What keeps you coming back? What is your why?
I mean, at the end of the day, like our job is to, the Bible talks a lot about this in Proverbs, like train up a child in the way he should go. And when he's old, he won't depart from it. Right. And when you see, even in your own life, right, that you make gains, right, in terms of your walk with the Lord, in terms of your intelligence, in terms of whatever you those things that you've set as goals for yourself, man, there's nothing better than that. And so to be a part of that for young people, where you can kind of help them cast a vision for their life, especially high schoolers, those are primarily the students I deal with. You have kids that, have never even begun to think about, like, what am I going to do after high school, right? Some kids are college bound or going to join the military. And, you have other kids that are just kind of trying to piece it together. And to be a part of shaping that and supporting them and figuring out, like, who am I? What am I trying to do? What am I trying to accomplish? And then help them kind of grow those skills to feel competent to be able to do that. It's life-changing.
Yeah. And I'm sure that's comforting for a lot of parents to hear that we do have administrators in the public school system that have that aim for their children. Switch gears to special education. There's a bunch of terminology in the special ed world. The Individuals Disability Education Act, big word, essentially just means that every special ed student has free and appropriate public education. It's like back in the day, they weren't allowed those freedoms in the least restrictive environment. Essentially, they should be with their peers in the general ed classroom. From an administration standpoint, I know teaching, this was one of my favorite things to do, is put my students in the general ed classes. And it typically didn't ever go smooth, but I just love for them to see life and for the chaos. And I just think it was good for everybody to see it. And then we weren't that weird class in the corner. And a lot of stories on that one. You've heard some of them. But what would you say are some of the hurdles to that implementation?
I think going back to that idea we talked about vision, right? And I think what is an administration's vision for their campus when it comes to inclusion, right? And my very first principal, I remember, she constantly would say, all of our students are all of our responsibility. There's not your students, my students, they are students at our school. And certainly that means that we might have to think differently at times. It means we might need to be flexible, but that's what we signed up for when we said we were going to be a public educator. And we don't get to handpick our students. We don't get to decide, I'm going to work with this student because their behavior is X, Y, or Z, right? It's whoever comes to the door, we're going to meet them where they are. And I think it takes a really strong administrative team or a strong leader to come in and say, like, that's how we do school here. Yeah. Right. And cast that vision that gets people, those teachers that want that sort of community excited about that. Right. Like, when you have a principal that stands up there and says, listen, I understand that it's going to cause us to think differently. Like, we're going to do this together. I know you're going to have questions. I'm going to have questions. We're going to answer them together. But the one thing that we're not going to do is create situations on our campus where there are those kids, these kids, my kids, your kids. And really hold that line that says, hey, this is how we talk about our kids. This is how we interact with our kids. This is how we treat our kids. And it requires us to change, right? I think, in our school district that I'm currently working in, we're talking a lot about universal design for learning. And one of the PowerPoint slides that the trainer kind of showed was this plant that was kind of growing in soil. And she said, when a plant is not doing well, you don't change the plant, you change the soil, right? You give it more water, you give it more sunlight. And that's all well and good on a slide, but what does that look like on an actual campus? And again, I think it comes from someone or a group of people that have some authority on that campus, like championing that idea that says, hey, I don't need Zach to come and bang down my door to say, hey, can my kids be in this class or can, in our master schedule? No, I'm already the one championing that. I'm the one looking for teachers that are fully bought in when it comes to inclusion. And I'm quarterbacking that, right? Like, I'm trying to figure out how do we get kids fully integrated, involved in whatever capacity they can or that they desire.
Yeah. Have you seen it go both ways? in your
Oh yeah.
time?
Oh, absolutely. So the school where I was principal, one of the things that I appreciated, I mean, there are pros and cons to this. It was the smallest comprehensive high school in our district. There were 850 kids. And so for a public high school, that's pretty small. The flip side of that is, the administrative team, the teacher, like we really knew one another. We knew each other's students, we knew kind of what was going on the campus. And there was just this energy. There were a number of like special education teachers and general education teachers that formed some really great partnerships. And I think those teachers also had a lot of clout on campus, if you will. And so people were more willing to kind of follow when it was like, hey, let's, your kids are going to come over here and help with this project that we're doing in our class. Or, it wasn't, there weren't like this idea of separate sections on campus. It was like, let's get kids involved. And you really saw it trickle down to the students as well, right? There weren't like separate lunches, separate lunch times, separate lunch areas. I mean, students with special needs you wouldn't even have been able to tell, right? They were just sitting out there. And the things I loved, there was a student in one of our mod severe classes who was a big fan of the baseball team. And so he kind of was like an assistant coach, and he would go to all the practices, and all the varsity baseball kids sat and had lunch with this guy. And, they loved Anthony, and Anthony wasn't a student from a special ed class. He was just Anthony. And they genuinely wanted to hear about his weekend, and he genuinely wanted to talk to them about what was going on in his class. And I think it just kind of trickled down from adults that said, hey, this is just how we do things here on campus, right? And you either buy in, or this is not the right place for you.
That's such a good point. It comes down from the administration. Because there was a couple campuses I was on where it was mostly, I knew the go-to teachers that would work with me, and they had the sense of humor and were able to handle it. And then there was the handful of teachers that were like not into it at all. But then having the admin support wasn't there. So there was like, there's no way that's ever going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, specifically the FFA, those guys were the best. All my students would be in there feeding the sheep, the goats, the chickens, whatever, chasing them, catching them. And that teacher, he just thought it was hilarious.
Yeah.
But then on another campus, not so much. They're like, don't mess with my chickens.
Yeah.
Come on. You tell them. Go or the gardening. We would grow like pretty amazing tomatoes. And then that one rogue day, he would rip them all out. And then it was that's just the way it is. And then the teacher would be like, oh,
yeah,
again.
Yep.
And then by the end of the year, if we sold $10, you can have it all.
Well, I think too, you talked about leadership, right? And I think that there's a big difference between being a manager and being a leader, right? And I think too frequently we have a lot of managers that think that they're leaders. A leader comes in and casts a vision. Hey, this is what I believe in. This is what I care about. This is what I'm excited about. This is where we're going to go, regardless of the barriers, regardless of the obstacles. We're not taking no for an answer because we believe in this so deeply. This is what we're trying to accomplish. Those are the type of people that, man, get you excited to come to work for, to work with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're not there as a stepping stone. They're not there to pad their resume. They're not there for a title. They're not there for a paycheck. They're there because they just deeply care about kids. They don't care who gets the credit. They don't care about the title. They don't care who does the work. Like, they just want to find talented people, orient them around something that they all believe in. I mean, there's excitement there. There's energy there. And I think it's hard to do that when you're on the lower end of the totem pole, right? When, it's just hard. You don't have as much opportunity to interact with the whole staff. You don't have as much opportunity to cast that vision when you're a teacher on a campus or an instructional assistant on a campus. And that's where I do think it's just so important to have leaders that have a clear vision, and specifically around special education, right? That idea, like I said, that all our students are all our responsibility. And then push the leader on that. What does that actually look like? It sounds great on a coffee mug. It's a great slogan, right? It's a good answer in an interview. But I want to know, what does it look like on your campus on Tuesday afternoon when I come to your campus? How will I see that lived out with your students, with your staff, with your volunteers?
How would you say they're accepted among their peers, the special needs community? Because I know a huge fear of parents is the thought that their child with disabilities is going to be separated and not accepted. And I know as a parent myself, my kids are shy, and just when I see them in public settings, not negotiate or communicating with anybody. It's like, get in there. And I can only imagine some of these parents, every step of the way they go, getting their kid into middle school, high school, that's got to be in their back of their mind. How have you seen them accepted?
Yeah, I mean, not even the back of their mind, right? Like you always have to remember that we have this whole, monstrosity that is formal education. At the end of the day, it's just communities of people trying to help kids grow and learn, right? Kids from all different walks of life, kids of varying abilities. And as educators, sometimes we get so deep into the weeds of lesson plans and all the things that we need to do at school, right? And the bell schedule and the master schedule and the budget, and we need to remember that parents in our community are sending a little piece of their heart to us each and every day.
Yeah.
And they're entrusting that to us. And man, what a amazing blessing and gift that is. And so I think just kind of first and foremost, remembering, right? Like, I know for me, when I was an educator and we had our first child, man, my whole mindset shifted. I understood that from a completely different perspective of like, this is your heart. You are trusting me more than, man, like anyone else in this world to take good care of your child, right?
Sure.
Or to partner with you to do that. And I think too, one of the things that's great, on our campus and in most of the campuses I've worked at, they've really had a push for inclusion. Whether it's like we have a lunch club called Best Buddies, and it's students with special needs, gen ed students coming together, playing games, having food. And I think the nice thing is there's this reciprocity there, right? If I'm a student and I get to participate in something beautiful and wonderful and special, or I'm caring for and loving other kids on campus, I'm creating a campus where I also receive that back, And I think kids are not bound by this idea of, okay, well, what are the logistics? How are we going to make this work, right? Legally, how do we do this? And, field trips and transportation and budget. Kids are just like, hey, I want to care about kids in my community. And so I think, when administrators, when staff give kids the space to step up and do that, man, I think kids totally respond. But I think it's that spark that schools have to kind of start to get the ball rolling, and kids follow suit, right? Like I think kids are looking for opportunities to feel good about themselves for positive things, right? Whether that's serving other kids in their community or just building new friendships or, finding ways to give back. I don't feel like the obstacle or the barrier is other kids, to be quite honest.
No, I think it's just getting over the image and the label that society has put on it. I know when I started, when I was at a middle school and I had 2 teacher aides. Do they even do that in California anymore? Are you allowed to have it?
Yeah. We got instructional assistants.
Well, no, it was gen ed students that just came in for and helped out.
Yeah.
And they were like phenomenal helpers. And then I'm like, hey, you got any friends? Like we need to get more of you guys in here. And then it turned into like a best buddies. It was called Wolf Pals.
Yeah.
But there was like 20 kids and they weren't happy with it being 1 day a week.
Yeah.
Can we do it twice a week, 3 times a week?
Mm-hmm.
You can hang out as much as you want.
Yeah.
But it's just, like you said, like that leader in the classroom or in the administration, just kind of mobilizing people, students to kind of do it all with the right vision.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think too, obviously you and I met one another through a mission group, through a church we went to. And I think kind of that at first it's very structured, right? We meet at this day at this time, kind of start to get to know one another. And then, hey, meet up at the park, bring our kids, right? And like eventually like that kind of grows from this sort of static, structured process to like, we just develop relationships and friendships. And I think the same is true for kids. Hey, Best Buddies is every Tuesday. And then all of a sudden they just develop friendships that go, hey, I just want to hang out, right? This isn't a student in Best Buddies. It's a friend of mine, right? And now when I see whoever, when those students see one another at a dance or at a school football game, it's not a structured event. It's not something they're doing to get volunteer hours. It's like, we're just hanging out with friends, and I think that it starts maybe sometimes with creating those spaces for that to occur, for those friendships to kind of start to develop. And I think over time, those just grow into more organic relationships.
Yeah, no, it's good. IEP meetings, individual education plan. Every special needs student has one. It's a big legal document that has all their goals, objectives, yada, yada, yada.
Mm-hmm.
As a teacher in those meetings, they were typically pretty stressful. I mean, there's an admin in there, parents, every service possible. They were an hour and a half. But it was like my job as the case manager to bring the vibe.
Bring the vibes.
I would always just try and keep them positive, because so many times before I was teacher, sitting through some of this, it was just like everyone's telling the parent,
Right.
there's something wrong with their kid. And it was hard to hear. And then I would see parents rejected and fearful and like just hopeless. What is it like on the admin? I mean, you've been in them as a teacher, principal, assistant. What do you see with parents on those? Or what could you tell parents?
I mean, I'll say this. One of the things that's really difficult, and I sit in a lot of IEP meetings, is I think sometimes we forget that we are talking about a human in front of that human, and think about how would you feel, right? If you gathered, I always kind of have the same spiel, right? A kid sitting there, and I usually try to talk to the kid first, and I say, listen, hey, I was a high school boy once too. I know that if I was sitting in a room with all my teachers, my case manager, my parents, my assistant principal, who I don't even know, I would be thinking, how long till I can get the heck out of here, right? Like, this is so uncomfortable. And what I always try to say is like, hey, we're just here because we care about you, right? And we're going to have some conversations, but you're the most important voice in this room, right? Like, this is all in service of adult you, future you, right? And if we start saying things that you go, no, that doesn't sound accurate, or, that doesn't sound like it would be helpful. Like I give you the green light to speak up. Like, when have you ever had an adult tell you can boss a group of adults around? Well, I'm telling you right now, you can, and I think we just have to shift that, because we all show up with our agenda. I've got my report. I've got my goals. I've got what I've got to get through. And it's not to say that's not important, but if that's only in service of me being able to say, I've done my report, I've checked my legal box, okay, so be it. But this is all an investment in a human, right? And I think the second part is, for adults as well, like you were talking about earlier, there's so much jargon that we use all the time. And we have a tough time at times putting ourselves in the shoes of people who may have never heard this before, right? We're throwing around acronyms, we're throwing around, scale scores and testing and this and that. And, at the end of the day, parents just want to know, like, how's my kid doing? Like, where is this all headed? How can I be part of it? How can we work together as a team? And so I think, sometimes, stepping back from that and just remembering we're talking to a parent, again, about that little piece of their heart where it's like, hey, man, they're nervous. They've been to these meetings where they've heard, the behavior's an issue. Yeah, I know. Great. And we just skip that part, right? And so I think, first and foremost, I would say remembering that, and then all of our questions and sort of the posture of our heart is, well, what do you want for your child, right? Like, I'm going to be your kid's case manager for 3 years or 4 years. You're going to be their parent their whole life, right? And so when they leave this place, like, what is it that you're hoping to instill in your child? What is it that you're hoping to build? How can we help you with that? Even just having portions of the meeting that are geared toward that, man, not only you'll see, man, the tones of those meetings shift tremendously. And now you don't have a parent that's coming in somewhat defensive about what you're going to say about their kid, but you have a parent that's empowered, that feels like you're there to support them. And that's going to be a great relationship with that parent for the next 3-4 years, however long they're there. But so I think, again, placing the student, placing the parent at the center of the discussion, and allowing them to really genuinely have a voice. At the very end of an IEP meeting saying, I need to document parent concerns. Do you have any? I write 2 sentences. That doesn't count. Like, that doesn't count.
Or most of the time, there wasn't even time for that.
Yeah, right.
And then they're like, signing away.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think just that's so key, right? Like, we're just adults that live in a community that are tasked with helping our young people grow into the best versions of themselves. And let's just start from that as like first principles, right? How can I help you? How are you feeling about all of this? Like, do you feel like you're getting enough communication? What would you like that communication to look like, right? And just making sure that parents know our primary job as public educators is to support you in the growth and development of your child.
Yeah, and there's so many terms thrown around: neurodiverse learners, autistic versus autism, disabled versus disability. And it's offendable to anybody, especially in our culture where you can't say anything without getting, but then also like seeing, like you're saying, seeing the person as a human. I remember I had a specialist come to class from Boise when I was teaching up at Sandpoint, and she came in, and I disliked this, when they would always come in, because they don't know anything about my student.
Mm-hmm.
And they would come in and see him as a project. They would see all the documentation of his behaviors, and they would come in and tell me how to deal with his behaviors. And half the time they're already dealt with, but they just have to check their boxes and go through the story. So then I remember she came in and she's telling me how to handle him to not run away. And I just sat and listened to her for like 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, did you read like the last 2 months? Like, what? Like, he hasn't ran away once. But that was just the mindset that I always ran into. And then I was frustrated after that. And then with my staff, I'm like, team, we need to have a team meeting. I'm going to start a consulting business. It's called Street Sped. Make your child feel human again. Because that was always a lot of the stuff I would run into.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, they're not projects, they're people.
Mm-hmm.
And the less interventions and therapies and behavior modifications we throw at them, because that's what special ed tells you to do,
Mm-hmm.
the better off I always had with them.
Yeah.
And just give them the same opportunities in life as everyone else.
Yeah.
And then everyone was always like, how do you like, their behaviors are improving? I'm like, because I'm not doing the stupid, put your dot here, put your dot here. You got 5 coins. Way to go. So,
Yeah.
more intrinsic motivation, like, oh, you want to watch a movie? Sweet, let's just do a little bit of work. And then they would do the work and watch the movies. Not like, you want a coin?
Yeah.
Applied behavior analysis.
Right.
I can go off on that one, but we'll pass. Okay. So these terminology, neurodiverse learners, that's the newest one going around. I know you've had a polarizing experience with some things you've stood up for, which is admirable.
Mm-hmm.
I know when I moved to Idaho, I went through a bunch of trainings, and I remember coming home and telling my wife, like, I cannot teach in this anymore. Like, we're going to move. We were already thinking about it anyways. So we moved, but you didn't move. You faced it head on and stood up for what you believe. And it caused a lot of controversy. And a lot of people don't really like you.
It was polarizing, I'll say. Yeah.
Yeah. What happened there? What was it all about?
This is part 2 of the podcast. This is where we take a turn down a totally different road. But so
it plays into inclusion and
sure, 100%.
Just the whole atmosphere on a campus that parents can know that there is solid people, because I know that's a fear. Like, oh, I'm just sending my kid to a school, or what are they going to get into and learn and stuff? But there is moral people standing up for what they believe in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's, so I guess kind of the short version of it is the Board of Education in the district I worked in tasked the schools. It was part of sort of their diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging initiative, right? DEI, and they added the B. And so part of the belonging. Yeah. And so part of that process was the board asked the district to conduct a survey with students, staff, and families, and then host what they called a listening and learning, kind of like a town hall meeting. There were a handful of them. And they invited, and I'll give them credit for this, like they sent out invitations to members of the community as well. And so the church that my family attends happens to be in that community. Our pastor received an email and just spoke with me about it. Hey, can you tell me more about this? What does this look like, right? It was more formal questions like, hey, how do board meetings work? How does a town hall work? Like he wanted to sort of understand it to be able to share the invitation to the church community, which was what he was asked to do, right? They were invited guests. And so he and I sort of spoke about it, prayed about it, and decided that we would kind of host a informational session for members of our church. It wasn't like a publicized thing, but just to kind of help them understand, hey, here's what they're talking about. Here's what this listening and learning session looks like. You can come and share, right? And just to equip people to be able to speak to our biblical values, why we believe what we believe, why we think what we think. And so we hosted this meeting at church. It was on a Friday night. It was well attended. 300 plus people were there. It went really well. It was really time, just like I said, to speak about concerns that we had regarding some of this agenda, and say, hey, how do we as godly men and women respond from a place of love, right? Certainly we have things we agree with, we have things we disagree with, and we want to be able to do so respectfully, share our concerns. And we thought that this listening and learning session was a space to do that. So I spoke for, I think, 40 minutes or so. And, as an administrator myself, I'd done a lot of research, right, into this idea of diversity and equity, inclusion, belonging. And I think the tricky part is, it's such a broad brush, right? What does that mean when you hear the word inclusion? Of course, we want people to be included. That of course we do. We want people to feel like they belong. And then the next question becomes, what does that actually look like in practice, right? Like I said, certain things can be great slogans. Who doesn't want kids to feel included? The question becomes, what does that look like? And so we were just sort of asking for more details. Can we be specific around that, what that looks like? And sort of the two elements of my talk, if you will, or the information I shared was a lot of data, a lot of research. I didn't cite from the Bible, right? At the end of the day, if we're going to go talk to members of our community, they don't care what the Bible says, or at least some of them don't. But I think that the truth of God's word is evident in his creation. And there are just concerns we had about some of the harmful things being promulgated or being told to our young people. And so we really, at the end of the day, said, hey, we just want to make sure we're fully transparent with what we're doing with other people's children, that we don't lie to people, that we don't hide things from people. And that number two, there's no place for sexual ideology or content in the work that we're doing in education. That's a conversation that should be had between a child and their family, which I thought, it does not sound controversial to me. And ironically, actually, even before all of that, I said, I don't want my district to think that I'm trying to be underhanded or sneaky. So I really prayed about it, and I reached out to my principal. I reached out to the superintendent prior to speaking, and I said, hey, I just want to let you know, men and women of faith and my faith community have some concerns. They want to figure out how to share those concerns respectfully. Thank you for creating this listening and learning session. If you'd like, I'd be happy to talk with you more about it and share my concerns. And those conversations didn't come to fruition. But anyway, long story short, spoke on Friday. Saturday morning, I woke up to a bunch of text messages from my principal and from a few other people saying basically what in the world happened last night, and found out that someone had come to the session, had secretly recorded it, posted it on a Facebook page or a parent page or something. And it started going around social media, started going around the community, and it just kind of blew up from there. Like there was a pretty big response from the community. Like I said, pretty polarized. They were either, hey, thanks for saying what you said, or, it got to the point where there were even people calling and threatening my children, keep people calling and threatening me, people calling to get me fired, and just kind of went from there.
Wow. But you kept showing up
every day.
What was that like? Walking on campus, like students yelling at you?
Oh, yeah.
Playing stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. The first interaction, ironically, so there's a sort of a backside to the administrative building, and there's kind of these double doors, these glass doors. And I was kind of doing some work in there, making some copies, and a parent kind of walked up with this sign that had my face on it, and that I needed to be fired, and I shouldn't be around children. And she's kind of walking up this back area, and I see her sign, and she walks up, and I open the door, and I said, "Oh, excuse me, ma'am, actually you have to enter through the front entrance. The admin office is over there." She had no idea who I was. She said, "Oh, thank you so much. You have a good day." She kind of goes around, right? But there were kids that wore shirts with my picture on it that had some comments. There were kids that posted QR codes around the school. There were kids that were handing out flyers as kids were coming in, telling kids to research this and how to think and how to feel, and specifically toward me. So the ironic part, though, is those are sort of the things that made the news. But for every kid or parent that had a negative comment, I had 5 or 6 kids or parents call or email saying, "Hey, just thanks for saying what you said." I had even a couple kids. There was a kid who was a junior at the time, came to me a few days later and said, "Hey, on Monday, I was really upset. Was really hurt by what I thought you said. And I went back and listened to everything. And, I disagree with some things, but I feel like it was coming from a place of love. And I just want you to know, I really appreciate that." And he shook my hand, and I said to the young man, "That's the most mature way anybody, student or adult, has handled this."
Student.
It was a student. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I found out that week. So that I spoke on a Friday. That first day, Monday, came back, found out on Friday that there were a number of complaints filed against me, and the district was going to conduct an investigation. I was speaking on a Friday night in my church. I didn't go as a representative of the district, and I tried to do so, respectfully and from a place of love. And so fortunately, we were able to get connected with some people at First Liberty that represented us. And, I had no desire to sue anyone. Here I am being investigated, and we knew we needed help, support, especially because prior to that, the superintendent put out a public statement in the district condemning me and condemning what I said. And so it got pretty heated, as the sole provider for my wife and 8 kids. There were some concerns there. So got connected with an amazing team at First Liberty, and they kind of walked us through the whole process, especially through the investigation. Came to find out later that one of the people who submitted the complaint was a husband of one of the board members. So there was some interesting conflict of interest there Fortunately, the investigation happened. The district found that I'd done nothing in violation of district policy. They wrote a kind of a response saying that they disagree with what I did, wish I hadn't have done it, but technically I hadn't done anything wrong. The husband of the board member didn't agree with that decision, so he took it to the California Department of Education, tried to have them investigate it. Fortunately, the California Department of Education said, hey, look, it's free speech, it's protected.
Yeah.
It didn't happen on campus. It wasn't a school event, like leave it alone. So we thought, great, everything's done. It should be good, right? We have the letter from the state. We have the letter from the district saying that, I hadn't done anything wrong. Well, a few months go by and I get told by my attorney there's another complaint. And this was from a handful of teachers on campus saying essentially that my discipline towards male students was more severe than my discipline toward female students in similar situations. And so the district did an investigation there. And the ironic part was those two incidents with the students happened in February. The teachers' complaints weren't filed until I believe it was June. And interestingly enough, I'm pretty anal retentive. I keep records of everything. And so I had the emails from the teachers back in February saying, hey, thanks for your help with this. I felt like that went well. The conversation with the parent was good. So nothing seemed to indicate that they were unhappy with how the situation was handled or they disagree with it. And so we went through that sort of third round of investigations, and again, came out that the district found that there was nothing that I had done that violated school policy. So
it's like Trump. So where's it at now? Is it all?
God's using it for good.
Yeah.
And I'll say,
well, the fact that you're kind of like what we've been talking about, you kept showing up, people see who you are, and the fact that you're just continuing on with your why and your aim and your vision. They got to see that and be like, okay, he's an actual person, holds fast to his convictions. And, that's the example that I think every parent would want to see on a campus for sure. Even though maybe we don't agree, who cares? We probably won't agree with a lot of things.
Right.
But like the junior came up to you and had a conversation like that.
Yeah.
That's pretty nice.
Well, I think too, right? Like we're saying, man, we're a country that is polarized on darn near everything. And we're not going to survive it if we instantly castigate people who we disagree with as sexist or bigoted or homophobic, right? We have to be able to have conversations. And I think that's super important, and be able to really listen to one another. Going back, like, are there maybe ways I could have worded things a little differently? Sure. But I stand by, like, why I said what I said is I'm genuinely concerned about the health and well-being of kids. You might disagree with that assessment, but I hope that you can at least say, look, I don't think this guy's out there, from like a place of tyrannical control or trying to lord things over students. Just, I'm concerned, man. When we look at the data, I think the data is pretty clear. And ironically, there were teachers that, I shared a lot of data when I spoke that basically said, hey, all that data is misinformation. And I said, well, the best way to combat misinformation is just better information. So show me what you got. I'm happy to read it. I'm happy to look at it. I genuinely came to it as an administrator with, like an open mind. Like, how do we understand this, right? And if the way that we as communities try to work our way through it is just to yell at each other, it's not going to work. I've got kids and I've watched them yell mine at one another over and over again. It doesn't work,
Right.
But I'll say this, like, in terms of how God used it for me personally, man, it forced me to get into the Word, and it forced me to really be more disciplined in my prayer life. And I think, there's a story in the book of Daniel, right? A pretty famous story with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they're, these three men that sort of stand firm in their convictions, if you don't know the story. And the king kind of, his response to this is he looks at it as insubordination, and he throws these three men into this fiery furnace. And sort of the climax of the story is he looks into the furnace and he says to his guards, hey, didn't we throw three guys in there? And the guy says, yeah. He says, why? And the king says, well, I see a fourth man in there, and he looks like the Son of God, right? And he also says that the men are loosed of their chains have fallen off. And it just hit me, right? Like, if you're in a fiery furnace and you're trapped in there because you're tied up, and all of a sudden your chains fall off, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to sprint out of that thing, man. But they didn't.
They stayed,
because that's where they met the Lord. And God just, man, I tell you what, like, he really revealed to me that those are some of the places where he reveals his power when you have nothing, when you're like, there's no way I'm getting myself out of this, God. Like, I need your help. And so I think for me personally, it was tough, man. Toughest time of my life, hands down.
Yeah, imagine.
And, but I'm so glad, so thankful that the Lord revealed his strength in that time.
Yeah.
And then I think, like you said, there are other people, and this is, again, not by my strength at all, but hopefully if we as godly men and women show up every day, and not just show up, but man, show up with joy. Yeah. The only way you can explain that is the Lord.
Right.
And so I think that there are hopefully people that go, I want to know more about what's going on there. So this doesn't seem normal, right? Like, tell me more, because that's the place where we can just say
joy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, you realize there are a lot of people that hate you, right?
Yeah, right. No, it's just that classic phrase, life happens for you, not to you. And you can play the victim all day long and never gets you anywhere. But when you start to shift your mindset towards why is this happening? Not in a negative sense, but like, what can I get from this to make me better for the future?
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of the parents of special needs kids, a lot of times they feel that way. They feel like, why did this happen to me? Why does my kid have to be like this? What's going on here? And I think it just takes a mindset shift of, like, we had an amazing couple on the show last episode, and that was their mindset, was like, I don't know what God's doing, but he's going to use their kid for something, and he's going to impact a lot of people. And they're like, we're just stoked to watch it happen.
Yeah.
So getting out of that, I mean, that's a great example.
Well, you can't stop people like that, right? Like, it reminds me of in the book of Acts when Paul is going to go to Jerusalem, the apostle Paul is going to go to Jerusalem, and the disciples are like, crying about this, like, hey, they're going to put you in jail. And he kind of says, like, jail, don't you realize, like, I'm ready to die for this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm ready to die. Like, you can't stop anyone like that. Right. And I think when you walk with the Lord and realize, like, he's going to see you through it, he's going to build you, he's going to use these to build strength in you, to build endurance, to build broader vision, right? That, like, maybe your parenting, maybe your story is going to give somebody else encouragement or hope. Maybe what your son or daughter is going through is going to allow you to tell a story that wouldn't be able to be told. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know. I mean, I think that like you said, like, God can use those situations. He can use those to do amazing things,
Right. And that's a lot of the motivation for this podcast, is just inspire other parents, because all of them have crazy journeys that they're going through, and just to hear them. I mean, I heard them all the time when I was teaching. I always like, we got to get this on paper. Like, people need to hear what you're saying right now, because that wasn't the case with this parent last week. But if they could just hear what you're saying, that's going to make their day so much better. So that's our goal. What would you say to parents? Like, if you had to say anything to a special needs parent, what would you want them to know as a parent administrator in the school system?
I think first and foremost, like I was saying earlier, like, I'm just humbled. Like, thank you for allowing us to be part of your journey. Thank you for allowing us to be people that impact your child, and it impacts their family as well. Right. And so it's just a humbling thing. And that's not lost on us. Like I said, that you send that piece of your heart off to us every day. And so I'm just appreciative of that. And I think also, like you said, like, when we share our stories, when we share the highs, when we share the lows, it's easier to bear that. You bear that together. And so don't be afraid to reach out to your administrator, your teacher, right? And ask those questions. How can I get connected with, whether it's a podcast or a parent group, or I just think when you know you're going through something with other people, it's much easier to do than if you're going through it alone. So.
And I know you're a big proponent of life groups, and that's how we met. You're my life group leader. What impact has that had on your life? I know I'm in one right now. It's a personal development, faith-based business coaching life group, and it's been everything. Like, I can't imagine where I would be without the support of, I have 10 guys that we communicate pretty much every day on Marco Polo, and just about anything and everything. How has that played in your life?
Kind of going back to the idea of vision, like we talked about at the beginning, like, the husband you want to be is not going to happen by accident. The marriage you want to have is not going to happen by accident. The friendships you want to cultivate are not going to happen by accident, right? And so part of that is just being able to have a vision for yourself. And part of that vision has to include other people, right? And so how do you find those spaces where you take those steps to connect with people, share what's going on, be vulnerable? Because I think, like you're saying, like we talked about with kids earlier, right? They just need those spaces to connect. And man, the love we have for people, the elements of who we are that's very relational, that takes care of itself. But you got to put yourself out there. You got to share what's going on with you, with your communities. There's a lot of bad that can happen when you isolate yourself, and just finding people that will speak truth to you when you need to hear it, that'll tell you hard things when you need to hear it, that'll be a shoulder to cry on when you need just somebody to kind of be able to say, like, I'm broken, I don't know what to do. Man, it's do it together.
Yeah. And that's our goal with UNspecial, to get parents in groups and communities to share their stories, support each other, because we know how impactful it has been. And just the thought that you can do something in your life to make it a little bit easier, like, why not jump at that opportunity? Before we go, let me hear some stories. Like funny, impactful, name it.
You got two that came to mind. I'll give you a funny one and an impactful one. So my very first job in special education prior to being an ed specialist. My mom was a teacher, like I shared, and this was back before you could go online and search for jobs. And I was like, I got to find a summer job. And she said, well, why don't you go down to the local school district office? They got a job board. So I go down there and
join.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of go up to the little front desk, and the girl who's working there, I said, hey, do you guys have any jobs for the summer? And as I'm talking to her, the director of special education happened to be right there. And she said, hey, you're a big guy. Like, have you ever thought about working in special education? It's kind of like, why do I need to be a big guy to work in special education? That's weird. And she said, I forget what she was going to pay me at the time. And she's like, it starts at whatever an hour. It was like way more than working at Subway down the road. So I was like, lady, I'll do whatever you want for that amount of money, right? Like, I was a young kid. I just needed, to make some money. And so I got hired as an instructional assistant. I worked in this special day class. It was about 8 kids that were 13, 14 years old, but developmentally maybe between 3 and 5 cognitively. And so the one woman who was kind of working this room that was meant to train me was showing me a bunch of different resources and materials. And there was a, I don't know what you call it. It was like one of those like exercise machines where you stand on it and it's like a power glider or something. And she says, so sometimes the kids, they'll use this for a break to get some movement. And she calls over one of these kids, and this kid was a big kid, right? He's maybe, 200 pounds. And he hops on this like glider thing, and she's standing right in front of it. Okay. And she's talking to me, and she says, yeah, so we give them a 5-minute timer. And this kid, I don't know if he did it on purpose, but he took advantage he understood the moment, right? And he reared back, and that thing flew and hit her right in the shin, man. And I remember it was in that moment, I realized why the guy wanted me to be a bigger person, because it was going to be a physical experience, man. And I was like, oh, that was day one.
That was kind of like my first day.
Yeah.
I got kicked in the shin when I walked into the class. I'm like,
yeah,
this is cool.
Yeah. I think that kid might have had some pent up aggression toward that instructional assistant.
It was intentional.
He was like, I see what's up. So
it is smart.
Yeah. And then I think the other one that stands out, just recently, we had a young man who, not Anthony, who I mentioned from the other site, but a young kid who's at our school currently, and he's kind of an assistant on the football team, assistant coach. And they, about 2 games ago, it was one of our JV games, I think maybe a freshman game. The coach on the other team was talking with our coach, and they said, hey, let's get this kid in so he can run a play. And so it was the first play of the game, and they got him padded up, and he was out there and sweep right, hand in the ball. It was quick, man. He goes flying down the sideline for a 70-yard touchdown run. And I mean, the stadium just goes wild, right? And just to be able to see the parents who, I'm sure had sat through all of those meetings, right? Had heard like, hey, your son might not be able to do this or might not be able to do that, or right, he's reading at this level, he's not on track for, fill in the blank. To just have a moment where they could see their baby boy doing something he loved and having a crowd full of people cheer for him. I'm like, man, it doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah,
like it was.
That's like a chill moment.
It was unbelievable.
Going everywhere. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, thanks for joining us.
Man.
Last, to all the parents, we have an administrator here that sticks to his convictions, has morals, and is there for your kid. And that's the sole purpose of what he's doing. You are amazing. We're thankful that you're on this journey with us, and thanks for joining us.
Oh man, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us for another episode. Make sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you'd like to be on the show, you can find us on unspecialllc.com and on Instagram, unspecialllc.